Hello, everyone, and how are you today? We are back for another episode focusing on language barriers, and we want to delve a little bit deeper into this. We'll talk about things that parents do in general. Then we'll go and look a little bit deeper into where it really all comes from. And then we will end with what can be done about it. As you already know, this is my colleague Steve Costello and myself, Patience Modevi, and we are the duo of the Wired for Success podcast. So today we're talking about language barriers, but we're talking about it in a way that is more structured than what we did last week. Isn't it, Steve?
Hopefully, that's the plan.
Yes. Yes.
Let's see what happens.
So we
So,
give, oh, we go.
sorry, patience, go on.
Sorry. So we gave you a lot of different examples of sentences that normally you could hear, or maybe you've heard, or maybe you've said yourself as a parent. But but as you know, in the work that we are doing here, to create a better relationship with your teenager, you need to have a little bit of like a role model, role modeling role here. And in this role model, there's a work that needs to be done on the parents, on yourself as an individual. And this is where we are coming with this episode, especially.
Cool. So, what work do we need to do on ourselves? That's an interesting question.
Mm,
Well, let's think about teens for a minute. As teens are going through adolescence, things happen, things crop up, things that they don't understand, that they don't have the answers for, that are confusing, they're kind of mixed up. Sometimes they get mixed messages from one peer group to another to their parents. So there's quite a bit of confusion around, and that makes life difficult. So when they have got a particular challenge, they sometimes don't have the answer to how to manage that challenge. And that's natural.
yeah.
But we've got to remember as parents too that sometimes we don't have the answers because what's being brought in by our teen is perhaps outside of our experience. So, how are we supposed to know? And if we present as I'm the parent and I'm going to hide that I don't know and pretend that I do, that's usually see through, and our teens will pick up on it, and that's not going to be helpful. So, here's something for parents to think about. You do not have to have all the answers.
Mm.
And a brilliant, confidence inspiring thing to do with our teens is to say, hey, that's outside my experience. I have no idea. But do you know what? There are people I can talk to about it and we can find out together. Let's do it. And that instantly begins to build a really positive bridge. So it's not necessary to know all, to have all the answers. But sometimes we do have answers
Mm.
that are not appropriate. We talked about this last week. We do say things sometimes like, don't be so dramatic, was one of the examples we gave last week. That's not appropriate, not helpful. If we find ourselves habitually saying things like, don't be so dramatic, let's stop for a minute and just ask ourselves a really simple question. Where does that come from? And do some reflecting. Why do I use that phrase a lot? Where did it come from? It could be that it's in a popular TV series and it's overly repeated. So
Mm.
you kind of picked up on that. And if that's the case, that's easy to manage. But it could be the case that it's something that you heard often during childhood.
Yeah.
You may have heard it from parents, peers, grandparents, uncles, aunts, lots of different people. Don't be so dramatic. So it becomes a habit to use that phrase. And it's quite a damaging phrase as well, because it could well be that our teens are trying to express some emotion. They're not really sure how to do it because, like I said a minute ago, they don't know everything and they're doing the best to express it. So telling them not to be so dramatic is a big kind of a big explosion for them, and it hurts. So let's look back at our own past and see if we can identify where those things came from. So what do you think, Patience? What have you got to add to
I
that?
think on the same level as a parent, we don't have all the answers. There's also the idea that maybe you shouldn't have all the answers. So your teenager also has to do their own finding out of things. I think in this process and where we are going with this episode is really for you to understand the root cause of the language you're using, and how to shift it into a language that will stay longer than as we are talking with you here in this episode. Because normally, when you listen to something, a podcast, or you've read a book, you're kind of like, oh, yes, I'm going to do this and shift my language, which is amazing. But we want it to last the distance, not to be for 1 week or the time of the episode. And in order to do that, that's when you have to do the reflection to understand where does this come from.
Let's think about transparency for a minute. You often hear that word used a lot in the business world and the world of work. Everybody wants transparency. They want to be able to see what it is that they're going to get, whether they're going to have to pay for it or not pay for it or whatever. So transparency is really important. There's more to it than that, but transparency is very important. And as parents, we need to be transparent with our teens. So things like, well, I don't have the answer to that, but you know what? Let's do it together. Let's try and find out. I understand your feelings when the teen's having a little bit of a rant about something, but I don't really get it, what it is that's making you feel like that. So let's learn together. That's being transparent. It's saying, yeah, I understand what you're saying to me, but I don't really get it. That's being transparent, and that's positive, because that tells the teen, hey, my parent is listening. My parent is making the effort to understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And that is always going to be a big win. Things about trust as well. Often we worry, don't we, about what our teens are up to when they're down the street hanging out with mates. And it's kind of natural, and that's okay, because we care. We don't want them to get into trouble and all sorts of crazy things that can happen out there. We hear the stories. So trust is something that's important as well. We've got transparency going on and trust. I do trust you, but I worry.
Yeah.
I do trust you. So let's talk about what sort of support I can give you. That's transparent. That's not putting me on a pedestal up there. Sometimes I think our kids do put us on pedestals, but sometimes we've got to be willing to take ourselves off that pedestal because it's not actually the right place for us at that point in time.
Yeah.
So that's worth thinking about.
And is
So
it
how can we challenge?
Yeah. Go on.
If we think our language is a little bit questionable, how can we challenge it? Personally, I'm not talking about getting our teen involved. We could get them involved. That might be good. That would be helpful. What do you think about the things I say to you? Like when I said, don't be so dramatic, how does it make you feel? Or what about, how do you feel when I say, when I was your age? My mum used to say that a lot. When I was your age, and it used to do my head in. And it definitely didn't help. Sometimes it was funny what she would say, so that was okay. But it wasn't always funny. Sometimes it was quite serious. So we do need to think about it and ask ourselves, how can I change this? How can I challenge it? So, Patience and I are both parents. I only have one teen left in the house. The others are all bigger than teen now. And she's still challenging. She's still bringing home the stuff that she's 19, that the 19-year-olds bring home. Some of it is a bit frustrating. Sometimes I want to say things like, hey, you need to listen. I'm the boss. But I don't, because I know that that's not helpful. So what do you think we can do, Patience?
Well, before I get there, there was something I wanted to say. When you spoke about trust, is that being vulnerable, admitting that you don't know all the answers, but or even that you made a mistake in a judgment or in something that you said, saying, I'm sorry, this made you feel this way when I said that. That's a big part also of this work. One thing that often, I mean, not often, parents will do is admit that they've made a mistake because like you said before, there is this kind of like pedestal like role where you're like, no, I know it all and I'm in control of everything, which really and truly is not true. But when we look at that, we by being vulnerable, we also building trust. Also, so it's just to add on that, that we building trust, and that trust you're building is not gonna be affecting just the conversation you're having at that time. It's gonna also affect how your teen is gonna keep on coming and coming to you. Because everything we are talking about here, even though it's solely told in a small podcast, it's about long-lasting impact in your relationship. So it might look like when Steve is saying you build trust, da, 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 it's just, oh, this is one thing you can do, but actually it's part of a process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And then back to the question you asked, which was, what can you do about it? Well, for me, I think that there's a lot of work as an individual that needs to be done for us as we are evolving into different stage in our lives. So as parents, the work doesn't stop. You still have to do that kind of like reparenting. I mean parenting, but you reparenting yourself. And that's the reason why you are able to then shift the language or shift the behavior with your team. So yes, there's this idea of like we need to shift, but really and truly you re-educating. I don't know if that's the right word, but you're re-educating yourself. So thinking of things like when I was a child, like Steve mentioned, what did your mom used to say, Steve?
All kinds of things. When I was your age,
Yes,
in other
yes,
words, I was doing something that didn't fit what
yeah,
she expected me to be doing
yes.
at that point in time. So when I
So
was your age, this is what we did.
exactly. So then just think about this and think back to what your parent was saying and how did that make you feel? So if you were to reparent yourself in that situation, what would you say to yourself at that time? And then just having this little kind of like, I want to say mirror exercises, it can help for you to shift your language as well with your team,
Yeah.
or even be more in awareness of what you say. Sometimes you don't have to necessarily change everything, but just know, oh, what I said here is a bit shaky, you know?
So an interesting thing to think about as well is about relationships. And when I say relationships, I'm talking about the whole spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got parent-teen relationship, parent-parent, parent, other siblings. rest of the family, the extended family, and so on and so on, friends and peers, teachers. There's a million relationships in a teen's life, and that in itself can be very, very confusing. We take a lot of it with a pinch of salt because it's just routine and it's okay. But sometimes things come in that are confusing, that are difficult. So we've got all these relationship challenges going on. So as parents, we need to aim to have the best possible relationship with our teens, because that will help them in the long run.
Yeah.
So just think relationships and think about how confusing all of that is. It kind of blows your mind if you allow all these relationships to come in at the same time. It's like, oh my goodness, can't cope with that. And teens often can't cope with all that input, especially input that is sort of contra what they're hearing from other people as well. Doesn't mean we should bend to what other people think, but we certainly need to let them know that we're with them, on course with them. We're part of the journey, part of the voyage. At some point, they won't need us. Although even though I say that, my 30-year-old still does. And she'll come back. All of them do it. They come home. They need you. They might not explicitly say why, but they do, you know. So we need to work on that relationship and keep working on it. And by challenging the language we use within ourselves, that's something that can go a long way to help them with that process.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like you said, it's a long-lasting work, first of all, but also impact in the sense that is impacting all the other relationship in their environment. So this is a really great, like, I love this episode. I think it's a great episode because you're delving really deeper into what is, it's a little bit like as a parent, you're becoming a detective and you're looking at the past, what happened there? And then, okay, this present, what's happening right here? And then, okay, next, what do I want to do now? Or what's the next step? And in this detective work that you are doing, is just being honest, I would say, being honest and truthful into what you find is needs to be adjusted, and then, and then checking in with your teams, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. So don't forget, parents, teens, anybody who's interested in this topic, leave a comment, leave a message, get in touch, and we'll always get back to you. That's why we're here. We do work with parents and teens and other people too, or are not parents even, but still in the future, they may well be.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week.
Take care. See you soon.
Bye.